for Safe Medicines and the Alliance for Patient Access. While participating, all lines will be mute and the event will be recorded. At the end of today's presentation, there will be a verbal Q&A session. You can also submit a question and answer during our presentation using the question or the chat feature in the control panel. Once again, welcome to How Doctors Can Address Counterfeit Drugs. At this point, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Charles David. Dr. David Charles. He is the National Chairman of the Alliance for Patient Access. Dr. Charles is the Chief Medical Officer at Vanderbilt University Clinical Neurosciences Institute. He is also a national leader in movement disorders research and is chairman of the Public Policy Committee for the American Neurological Association. Dr. Charles took a leave from his practice in 1988 to spend a year on the staff of U.S. Senator Bill Frist, where he served as a public policy advisor. During this experience in Washington, Dr. Charles conducted Parkinson's research from France and as a Fulbright Senior Scholar. Welcome, Dr. Charles.
Thank you, Deborah. So again, my name is David Charles. I'm at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, and I serve as the Chief Medical Officer of our Neuroscience Institute there. I'm trained as a neurologist and take care of people with Parkinson's disease and related conditions, and have been very active in my state and national society, serving on the Legislative Affairs Committee of the American Academy of Neurology, and I currently chair the Public Policy Committee of the American Neurological Association. As Deborah mentioned, after being on the faculty at Vanderbilt University a few years, I took a leave from my practice, moved to Washington, D.C., and served as a fellow in the United States Senate on the Subcommittee for Public Health and Safety, and dealt with issues related to health and human services like the FDA, NIH, CDC, and so forth. Following that experience, worked with a colleague, Brian Kennedy, to form the Alliance for Patient Access. And on the screen is the mission statement of our organization. It's really a national network of physicians who come together to ensure that our patients have access to approved medical treatments. That could be also medications, biologics, devices, also medical devices that may be prescribed, diagnostic tests, and even hospitalization. We accomplish this mission through educating our physician members to be advocates, and we carry that out in a host of areas. Here are some of the topics that the Alliance for Patient Access is currently involved in. Therapeutic substitution and the prescriptive authority for physicians is definitely an area of keen interest. When we write a prescription for our patients and they get to the pharmacy and someone's trying to change what the patient is receiving. Certainly, having our patients have access to the things we're recommending to them impacts coverage and payment. So be that a drug, a biologic, or a hospitalization, a diagnostic test that our patients may need. We're very concerned about the inappropriate use of evidence-based medicine or comparative effectiveness research. Certainly, all research that provides better information to make more informed decisions is good, so long as that research is carried out in a way that ensures that the integrity of the research is there, and it's not just simply a ploy to drive our patients to the least costly alternative. And then finally, the physician-industry interaction and relationship. Certainly, as a researcher, I carry out a host of lines of research on new drugs, biologics, and medical devices for people with Parkinson's disease and related conditions. And those interactions between physicians and industry to bring the next new therapy to our patients is vital, and certainly industry's participation in education in addition to research. The Alliance for Patient Access hosts a number of activities, health policy workshops. Probably since 2006, we've hosted between 15 and 20 of these, teaching physicians to be better advocates for their patients. A lot of opinion editorial pieces and media interviews on the health policy issues just mentioned, open letters to policymakers, and meeting with policymakers and their staff in Washington here, and also in state capitals. And then participating in webinars like today's. We are certainly happy to be in partnership today for this webinar, and let me introduce to you Tom Cubitt. Tom will be our speaker from here and serves as the treasurer of the Partnership for Safe Medicines. He's also president and CEO of the Pharmaceutical Security Institute. Now, this is a nonprofit dedicated to protecting public health by ensuring the distribution of pharmaceuticals are safe and effective. He has a 30-year career as a federal law enforcement executive and has been with the Federal Bureau of Investigation for a large part of that time. He served on the World Health Organization's Impact Enforcement Working Group and has provided expert testimony before senior government officials around the world concerning the international nature of counterfeiting medications and the devastating impact that it's having on our patients. So with that, I'll turn it over to Thomas.
Well, thank you, Dr. Charles. I appreciate the invite, and good afternoon to those who are participating in the webinar. I want to begin by kind of looking at that first slide and thinking about how long the authorities have been engaged in this fight against counterfeit medicines. If you were to look at that particular headline and substitute a few words, you'd see that not only has this been a long-going battle, but it's actually hasn't changed particularly much in the following years. So, for instance, instead of saying that newspapers are being asked to refuse to take fake drug advertisements, we might as easily say that Google has agreed to refuse taking fake drug advertisements today. The same situation that occurred years ago with regard to loopholes in the existing law making enforcement difficult exists today. And additionally, comments such as "this evil must be stamped out" have been around for a long time. So exactly how long ago were these statements made? Well, those comments were from a newspaper article in the New York Times on February 13th, 1913. So counterfeit medicines have been around for a long time in the United States, and they present some unique challenges. In response to, I need to back that up, I'm sorry. Deborah, can you back that up for me? Okay, I can, there we go. In response to this particular problem, the manufacturers has established the Pharmaceutical Security Institute, which serves as a coordination center. Staff exist in both the Washington area as well as Hong Kong and the United Kingdom at London. We utilize multilingual FBI-trained analysts to look at and to survey the situation as it exists around the world and to identify and then document incidents of counterfeit. A word about that would be in order, because too often we see estimates, we see guesstimates as to the extent of counterfeit medicines around the world. And what the Institute does is we look at the type of reporting that is common to police agencies around the world. That is, for a crime to have been committed, we need to know when it occurred, what happened, and in the case of counterfeit medicines, what drugs were involved, and who in fact determined that they were counterfeit medicines. So in a nutshell, the Institute is dedicated to protecting the public health and sharing this information that we develop about counterfeiting activity in order to initiate enforcement actions with the authorities, whether it's the World Customs Organization, Interpol, the national police agencies, or drug regulators from around the world. The members are the security directors of the companies whose logos are appearing on your screen in front of you. As you can see, these corporations are both based or headquartered in the United States as well as around the world, with companies represented from Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and France, just as an example. It's a unique organization because the responsibility for investigations and initial inquiries into counterfeit medicines rest with the security director and the security teams from these particular companies. So what's the situation? What do we know that's going on out there? Well, if we look at by the numbers for 2010, and the data that I'll be talking about are from incident reports in 2010, we saw last year the largest number of incidents that have ever been documented since the PSI began looking at this type of incidents in 2001. The percentage increase of over 2009 incidents, however, was only 2.5%, which in fact was the smallest year-to-year increase that we had seen since the establishment of the system in late 2001 and early 2002. Since recording this information, there were 11,829 incidents of counterfeit medicines, pharmaceutical crime, which we'll talk a bit more about in a minute. We're hung up a little bit here. Deborah, if you'd advance it. That's great. Thanks. Appearing on your screen are the three major categories of things that we believe lead to unsafe medicines. In the first place, counterfeit incidents rose, as I mentioned last year, 2.5%. And then we also are concerned about the illegal diversion of medicines. By that I mean medicines that are approved perhaps for sale and distribution in one region of the world, which are then smuggled to another area and sold. These are of concern because the physical handling, the transfer of these particular medicines are subject to risk from environmental degradation. So how the materials are actually sent around the world are of concern to us. I say we've moved past a few, so let me just pick up on the slide that is currently in front of you. During 2010, more than half of the incidents were linked to a country in the Asia-Pacific region. In fact, a third, 35%, were linked to China. 9.3% of the incidents were linked to the United States. In terms of what types of medicines are being counterfeited, what we saw last year was a particularly disturbing development. We saw that the drugs designed to treat chronic medical conditions, including diabetes, hypertension, were increasing. So for instance, last year we saw drugs that were designed to treat metabolic disorders were increased 182% over the preceding year. Also of particular concern was the rise of an increase in incidents involving cystostatic medicines, medicines to treat cancer patients. On the good side of the aisle, while we've seen these increases in terms of incidents, we've also seen that the number of arrests that were documented around the world increased to 1,148, which was, in fact, the second largest annual total that was ever documented by PSI. Some of the success stories we saw last year included effective actions in Cambodia, where over 19 tons of illegal medicines were destroyed, as well as 7 tons that were destroyed in the Bahamas. This particular photo that you're seeing is the destruction of medicines that were found and seized by the Bahamian authorities from a fulfillment center. And what that is basically a number of internet websites advertise medicines as being from Canada, for example. And in fact, many of the medicines sold through some of these illegal sites are in fact shipped and maintained from countries around the world, including, as was in this case, the Bahamas. When you looked at the inventory of these products in this particular site, not only were there counterfeit medicines identified, but there were also medicines that had been provided to developing nations under various accelerated access initiatives. So, for example, medicines found on the shelves in this particular warehouse included medicines that were provided to an African nation, subsequently diverted from that country, and then found their way into a shop that was fulfilling orders for internet purchases. Another one of the incidents that caused some concern is shown on or depicted in this photo, the slide, which shows some of the counterfeit cancer medicines that were seized at Xi'an, China last year. And the subjects in that particular case were sentenced to 15 years at the conclusion of a public trial in China. In the lower photo, you can see while my first picture was of a refrigerator with a small amount of the medicines that were counterfeit, what you see in the bottom photo are the additional trucks that were used to get those medicines to the incinerator. So what's happening and what does it look like for 2011? What have we seen so far? Interestingly enough, what we've seen is that there is a far greater recognition by law enforcement around the world that, in fact, well-established criminal groups are engaged in counterfeit medicine. The finding from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime was that this is a very opportunistic crime, and it emerges where the regulatory capacity is low. Some good observations, which is useful in helping to motivate an effective response by the authorities around the world. Let's turn our attention for a couple minutes and talk a bit more about the trends that we see in 2011 here in the United States. Basically, one of the key trends we've seen is somewhat of a shift of operations by some of the illegal or rogue internet sites from marketing to patients in the United States to a more direct and aggressive marketing to healthcare professionals and providers. We're also aware of and are concerned with the trend where we've seen increasing shortages of critical medicines in the U.S. supply chain, and believe that those shortages may lead to additional vulnerabilities wherein counterfeit medicines can enter the legitimate supply chain through gray market sales. On a positive note, the U.S. government has begun to enhance its enforcement efforts. We see a good effort to raise public awareness of the problem as well as improved enforcement. Let me take a couple of minutes. Deborah, can you back that up for me? Let me take a couple of minutes to talk about a particular case. Okay, that's good. Thank you. This was the first trend I had mentioned, and what I was talking about here was the fact that there has been a direct approach to healthcare providers. And what I wanted to discuss briefly was the question of whether or not U.S. doctors and or their staff are in fact falling for these particular pitches. You know, what's the impact of these increased efforts? And the example I wanted to talk about concerns a particular doctor. This was her website. You can see that if you are a patient with cancer, it is indeed something that you want to do. You want to face cancer with hope. It's a well-designed site, and it conveys some good background information about this particular doctor, Dr. MARTIRE. And when you look at training, you see this 52-year-old medical doctor conducted postgraduate training, DC General Hospital, a VA hospital here in Washington, and Georgetown University Medical Center. She had specialty board certifications in medical oncology, internal medicine, and no disciplinary actions by any state medical board had been reported in the past 10 years. In fact, Dr. MARTIRE was a keynote speaker at a June 22nd, 2011 event, which drew 800 plus participants and raised $253,000 for cancer patients. There was, however, a problem with her operations in that an investigation disclosed that she had purchased unapproved drugs from a wholesaler in England. The purchases totaled over $200,000, and one would say, well, was this advocate merely trying to help indigent patients by reducing the cost of these medicines? However, the facts of the investigation revealed that she was seeking and sought and was reimbursed as if these drugs were from U.S. sources, which provided her a net profit of over $790,000 in 2010. Dr. MARTIRE has since pled guilty on August 10th to federal charges, including misbranding drugs that are sold into interstate commerce. And I asked the question, is she alone? I'm having trouble advancing again. And the short answer is no. In Florida recently, the Drug Enforcement Administration brought down an undercover operation which involved over 340 undercover purchases of prescription drugs from 60 doctors. There were over 40 pill mills that were contacted in 2010. So you get a little sense of the extent of this problem. In addition to the doctors, nurses, and clinic administrators were arrested. In all, there were 22 persons arrested at that time. That investigation is ongoing. And they took their toys. Basically, these are some of the vehicles that were part of the seizure action when millions of dollars of assets were seized because of this illegal activity. $2 million in cash. The last individual I wanted to introduce you to was Dr. MEERA SACHDEVA. She established a cancer center, Summit, Mississippi, in 2004. You're looking at a photo of the clinic. Once again, this was an oncology clinic, internal medicine. And as was the case of Dr. MARTIRE, Dr. SACHDEVA had no complaints or disciplinary actions involving her practice. However, when 11 patients were hospitalized with the same infection, an inquiry determined and led to her federal charges in September 9th, 2011, for treating patients with chemotherapy drugs which contained different, less expensive drugs. At the same time, she was billing the federal and state health care programs for $15.1 million. In this case, as in the others, the authorities seized $6 million in assets, in currency rather, and we're awaiting resolution of that particular case. The examples I gave were not to paint all doctors as bad, but merely to show that the impact of some of these advertisements, these blast facts, have led doctors to make some poor choices, to make choices that in fact should have been adequately informed, that in fact some of the things they were engaged in were in fact violations of federal statutes. The next trend I wanted to talk a little bit about was this, the question of shortages and how that could lead to further penetration of the legitimate supply chain. And the questions I pose are exactly, how bad are the shortages and really what's the impact likely to be? And this is kind of my formulation, my assessment of it. In 2010, the FDA said that there was a record number of shortages for medicines. In 2011, that has continued, and in fact, it has already surpassed the number of shortages that we saw in 2010. If you to that situation, if you add the position that was conveyed from one hospital pharmacist who said, look, our physicians do not want to hear that a drug is unavailable. You see there's an exceptional amount of pressure to find these drugs. What it leads to, however, is also an increased opportunity for counterfeit or diverted medicines, medicines that are unapproved or stolen, to enter into the supply chain, and the results in a greater risk to patients. In fact, the Institute for Safe Medication Practices just issued a report on August 28th. And in that report, they surveyed 549 hospitals in the United States. And they found that for the last 2 years, over 52% of the hospital's purchasing agents had, in fact, made purchases from the gray market. They also reiterated the fact that on a daily basis they were bombarded with these solicitations, sometimes as many as 10 from gray market vendors, with requests coming through email, phone, and fax. One association reported the average markup was over 650% for a particular medication. So I wanted to talk a bit about some of the last trend that we've seen, which involved improved enforcement and increased public awareness. In the U.S., there's an intellectual property enforcement coordinator, Victoria Espinel, who is in fact a position which is in fact established by federal law. She leads the national coordination effort, and in addition to increased resources commitment, her office, working with a number of other corporations, including the financial sector, the small parcel delivery sector, as well as the companies engaged in search engines type companies, in order to curtail some of the internet activity. What that has done and what she has done is led to an increased resource commitment. So for example, the FBI currently has 50 agents nationally working on this particular problem, counterfeit medicines. Additionally, her efforts have led to the development of an intellectual property rights center, which is based near Crystal City, Virginia. And multiple federal agencies, the investigators operate out of that center, looking at and tracking cases involving counterfeit medicines as well as other intellectual property rights violations. In that center, there are representatives from Mexico and Canada, and on a daily basis they work to address the problem. Additionally, the Department of Justice has begun working with the National Crime Prevention Council. On the right, you see their famous logo, which is designed to take a bite out of crime, McGruff. And we anticipate seeing some work in terms of building public awareness by the NCPC working with the Department of Justice. Additionally, as evidenced by this particular briefing, the Partnership for Safe Medicines has been very much engaged in the dialogue, the discussion, getting information out, not only here but around the world. Last week I was in Beijing, China, working with the State Food and Drug Administration and acquainting them with the work of the partnership and how it's focused on education for the the healthcare professionals as well as the general public is one of the most effective ways to address this problem. So we come to the portion of the discussion which boils down to what can you do, what steps are likely to assist in alerting folks to the nature of this problem and to avoiding the problem. Well, in a nutshell, doctors, in my view, have a major role in addressing this problem. And in the first case, what I'd recommend is that they, in fact, stay informed as to the nature and developments in this area. Recommendations include signing up for the Partnership for Safe Medicines, the Safe Meds Alerts. In working with the FDA, whenever there's a FDA alert, that is relayed to the partnership, and we're able to broadcast that more broadly to the healthcare professionals as well as the individual associations that deal with specific types of illnesses and disease. Another idea, or one of the key things we believe is useful in terms of staying informed, is to use the Safe Source Guide. And there's really some straightforward, some very simple steps that you can do. We talked about shortages and the impact that could have. And some of the steps, for instance, in the Safe Sourcing Guide include the need to establish trusted alternative sources for medicines ahead of time before you're confronted with a shortage of medicines. The need to acquire a copy of that source's license from your state wholesale distributors regulatory board. And these materials are all available on the partnership website and are in addition to being handy guides, are chock full of information that's particularly important. Another thing doctors may consider is as you consult with your patients, when you see that you're not getting the response to a particular therapy, it should be one of the things you ask, which is, where did you get your drugs? I think that many doctors are surprised when they start that discussion because some of the sources and some of the feedback, I think, is often quite revealing. There are risks of online buying, and there are safe internet sites in which drugs can be purchased. The National Association of Boards of Pharmacies has a program which is effective and leads to safe acquisition of medicines. So, the thought here is have that discussion, and if you're seeing that you're not getting the response that you expected, it may in fact be because the patient's purchasing drugs from unsafe sources. And then the last thing to think about in terms of your role is to not hesitate to report those cases or those situations that you do encounter to either the state departments of health, the MedWatch, for instance, Health and Human Services, law enforcement, or the manufacturers. And this reporting would be not only for suspicious products, but also suspicious vendors. If there's an approach that seems to be too good to be true, that's probably because it is too good to be true. There may in fact be something terribly wrong with the offer and the person making that offer. I think we'll wrap it up at this point in terms of the formal presentation to allow some time for questions, comments, and discussion. And I want to thank you for your attention. And on behalf of the Partnership for Safe Medicines and the Alliance for Patient Access, I look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you so much, Tom. At this time, we'd like to invite the audience to ask our panelists questions. To verbally ask a question, please use the raise your hand function in the control panel, and I will unmute your line. You can also ask a question using the question feature and the chat features as well. Looks like we do have a couple of questions here. The first one being, do you believe patients should have the ability to authenticate products with manufacturers to ensure that it's a safe product?
Yes, that's a great question, and thank you for raising it. While I've seen various schemes wherein a patient can authenticate a product that have been used around the world, I've also seen some fairly elaborate countermeasures taken on the part of the individual counterfeiters. Let me give you an example of that. In Southeast Asia, there's a major problem with malaria and the anti-malarial medicines, and also a corresponding problem with counterfeit anti-malarials. And what has happened is that over the years, we've seen as many as 12 different types of holograms which have been used by manufacturers in that region to safeguard their medicines. And each one of those 12 has been counterfeited with a replication that is pretty good. I guess the short answer is that if there was a foolproof way that an individual could verify it, I think that would be a positive thing. I'll give you another example. In at least 2 African countries, patients are using text messages and a unique identifier on medicine packaging, which when you scratch it off reveals a number that you can send a text message to a central data point about. And that will respond whether it's been used before or whether it's a unique number. So there's a couple of different schemes that are out there, and they vary really based on the risk factors around the world.
Thank you. Another question is, do you believe track and trace could help with drug shortages?
Well, I think in terms of the potential for counterfeit medicines entering the legitimate supply chain, I would say yes. In terms of the overall drug shortage problem, I think that what we've seen is what FDA has suggested was that these tend to arise because of manufacturing difficulties encountered, and that the shortages tend to be short-term. Track and trace is would certainly help identify products that's outside of that supply chain.
Okay. And I have a third question, is wondering about serial number authentication as another method to combat counterfeit drugs.
Yes, most of the schemes, I talked about holograms, but on the text messaging, that would be a scheme which would involve serialization of the product as well.
All right, thank you. Are there any additional questions for Mr. Kubik or Dr. Charles? We have a question inquiring about, is there possible legislation that may affect counterfeits that's currently being proposed or discussed?
Let's see, over the last few years, there's been a couple of different bills proposed. I haven't looked at the recent additions. This idea of I think what the companies would find particularly useful if there were in the United States perhaps a greater harmonization, that whatever scheme is approved by the government, perhaps at the federal level, would have application across all 50 states. That way, as product moves around the U.S., that unique identifying number would stay, with that product, geared to expiration date, NDA code, and so on. So I think that, from the perspective of, what would be useful, the individual identifying number as well as a uniform standard harmonized across all 50 states and ultimately on a global basis.
All right. And are there any questions from our audience that would like to be asked verbally? That does look like the end of our questions. I'd like to once again thank our panelists, Tom Kubick and Dr. Charles, for taking the time to join us today. We will be putting this up on our YouTube channel as well as the Partnership for Safe Medicine's website, which is safemedicines.org. Thank you again for joining us, and have a lovely day.
Thank you.